Olivia stood at the highest tower of the Crystal Palace, watching the twin moons rise over the ancient elf cities below. She had lived for over 600 years and had seen countless changes sweep across her world, but nothing prepared her for what was coming. The radar screens in her hand showed 3 human ships approaching from the outer reaches of the Andromeda sector, and they were moving with purpose and determination. The Elf Council had called an emergency meeting that morning, and the news had spread like wildfire through the ancient civilization. Humans were real. They were not myths or legends from the distant past. They were a living, breathing species with technology almost as advanced as the elves themselves. The elders had debated for hours about whether to welcome them or destroy them before they could become a threat. Olivia's personal chambers were filled with the sounds of her 2 dragon companions. Ember, her male dragon with scales that gleamed like molten gold in the firelight, paced back and forth across the polished stone floor. His wings stretched and folded repeatedly as he sensed the nervousness in the air. Ash, the female dragon with silver-tipped scales and emerald eyes, lay coiled on a bed of soft cushions, watching Olivia with complete attention. The 2 dragons had bonded with Olivia over 3 centuries ago, and they had become as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. She reached out and ran her hand along Ember's warm, smooth scales, feeling the power beneath the surface. Dragons were rare even among elf civilization. Most of the dragon population had died out thousands of years ago due to disease and conflict. Olivia was one of the few elves still alive who had successfully bonded with dragons, and her pair was considered a treasure beyond measure. The message came through her communication device just after midnight. She was selected. The council had chosen her to be the ambassador to the human fleet. Her legendary skills with dragons, her combat experience, and her reputation as one of the few progressive voices among the elder races made her the perfect candidate. Olivia should have felt honored, but instead she felt a deep sense of foreboding. She had spent the last 5 years secretly studying everything she could about humans. While the council believed she was meditating and perfecting her magical abilities, Olivia had been downloading data from forbidden ancient archives about human civilization. She had learned about their wars, their revolutions, their incredible capacity for both creation and destruction. She understood that humans were the most adaptable species in known space, and they were not to be underestimated. The next morning, Olivia prepared for the meeting. She wore the formal robes of an ambassador, made from the finest ethereal silk that seemed to shimmer between blue and purple depending on the light. Around her waist, she tied a belt made from woven dragon hair that caught the light like spun glass. Ember and Ash remained by her side as she walked through the crystal corridors of the palace toward the diplomatic chamber. The other council members watched her with a mixture of respect and suspicion. They had always viewed her as somewhat of a rebel, someone who questioned the old ways too often. But her combat record was undeniable, and her magical prowess was legendary. More importantly, the dragons would go where she went, and the council believed the presence of the ancient creatures would give them an advantage in negotiations. The human commander's ship entered the atmosphere just after midday. It was massive, much larger than the elf vessels, built with a utilitarian design that spoke of function over form. Olivia stood on the landing platform with Ember and Ash, watching as the ship descended through the clouds. She could feel her dragon's tension, their ancient instincts warning them about strangers and potential threats. When the ramp lowered and humans emerged for the first time on elf soil, Olivia was struck by how small they looked. They were soft-looking compared to the tall, graceful elves with their pointed ears and luminous eyes. The humans wore heavy armor and carried weapons openly, a gesture that among elf diplomacy was considered extremely rude. But Olivia had expected this. She had learned that humans were different in nearly every way. Commander Marcus Adams walked down the ramp first, flanked by security personnel. He was taller than average for his species, with dark skin and intense eyes that scanned the landscape with military precision. When he saw Olivia and her dragons, he stopped for a moment, and Olivia could see genuine wonder cross his features. "I am Olivia, ambassador of the Crystal Realm," she said, stepping forward with measured grace. "Welcome to our world." Marcus approached slowly, showing respect despite the weapons he carried. His eyes never left the dragons, and Olivia could see the warrior in him recognizing the power that stood before him. "Commander Marcus Adams, Terran Colonial Fleet," he replied. "Those are incredible creatures. I have never seen anything like them in all my years of space exploration." "This is Ember and this is Ash," Olivia said, watching as Ash tilted her massive head toward Marcus. "They are ancient beings and they do not often greet strangers. You should consider yourself honored." Marcus smiled, and Olivia noticed something unexpected. He was not afraid. Most species showed at least a flicker of fear when confronted with dragons of this magnitude, but the human commander seemed more fascinated than frightened. Over the following hours, Olivia led Marcus and his team through the Crystal Palace. She showed them the libraries filled with texts spanning 10,000 years of elf history. She demonstrated elf magic, calling forth flames and ice and light with nothing but gestures and will. She took them through the throne room, where the ancient kings and queens of her people had ruled, and she explained the traditions and customs that had guided elf civilization for millennia. Marcus asked questions constantly. Some were about strategy and military capabilities, which Olivia answered cautiously. Others were about daily life, about art and music and philosophy. He wanted to know about the dragons, about how they were bonded, about what they ate and how long they lived. He asked about elf reproduction, about their history with other species, about their dreams for the future. By the time Marcus and his team returned to their ship for the night, Olivia had gathered something crucial. This man was not just a military commander. He was a genuine explorer, someone who wanted to understand rather than conquer. That did not mean he was not dangerous. Humans always were, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could find common ground. That night, Olivia stood on her tower again, with Ember on one side and Ash on the other. She stroked their scales and shared her thoughts with them through the bond they shared. The connection was deeper than words, a sharing of emotions and intentions that had developed over centuries of companionship. She could feel their uncertainty mixed with curiosity. Ember's fiery nature made him cautious about these newcomers. Ash was more open-minded, more willing to give the humans a chance. Together they formed a balance, and that balance had kept Olivia alive through countless conflicts and challenges. The following days brought more meetings and negotiations. Marcus brought engineers and scientists to study elf technology. He shared information about human development, their struggles to survive on their homeworld and how they had eventually spread to the stars. He told stories about human resilience and determination, about how they had failed countless times but kept trying anyway. Olivia found herself drawn to these stories. Her own people had lived so long that they had stopped taking risks. They had become comfortable with their power and their knowledge, and in that comfort, they had stagnated. Humans seemed to embrace change and see failure as just another step on the path to success. On the 7th day of negotiations, Marcus asked Olivia if she would take him to see the ancient dragon sanctuaries in the mountains. The council forbade it, saying it was dangerous to reveal such sacred places to outsiders. But Olivia overrode them, citing her authority as ambassador. She wanted to show him something real, something that mattered beyond politics and strategy. The mountain sanctuary was hidden high above the clouds, accessible only by flight or through ancient magic portals. Olivia and Marcus flew on Ember's back while Ash flew beside them, her wings beating powerful strokes against the thin air. Below them, the world fell away, and there was only sky and clouds and the sense of absolute freedom. The sanctuary was breathtaking. Carved into the mountainside were thousands of years of elf history, recorded in stone and crystal. Ancient dragons were depicted in murals that still shimmered with residual magic. There were bones of creatures that had died millennia ago, preserved through powerful preservation spells. There was a central chamber where dragon eggs had once been incubated, though none had been laid in over 300 years. Marcus stood in the center of that chamber, spinning slowly to take in every detail. When he spoke, his voice was filled with genuine awe. "Your people created something extraordinary here," he said, "something that transcends species and time. This is not just a sanctuary. This is a monument to something greater than yourselves." Olivia felt something shift within her at those words. She had brought this human to the most sacred place of her civilization, and instead of feeling like a betrayal, it felt like sharing something precious with someone who truly understood its value. As the sun set over the mountains, casting everything in shades of gold and crim, 3 weeks had passed since Marcus first arrived on the elf homeworld, and the diplomatic mission had taken an unexpected turn. What had started as formal negotiations between two species had evolved into something much deeper. Olivia found herself spending more and more time with Marcus. Not in official council chambers, but in private conversations where they could speak freely, without protocol or pretense. The council had grown suspicious, calling emergency meetings to discuss what they saw as Olivia's dangerous attachment to the human commander. But Olivia held her position with the confidence of someone who had survived centuries of political intrigue. She was an ambassador, they argued, and building personal connections was essential to successful diplomacy. It was a thin justification and everyone knew it, but her record was impeccable enough that they could not remove her from her post without causing even greater scandal. Ember sensed the tension whenever Olivia returned to her chambers after a day with Marcus. The dragon would pace anxiously, his scales flickering between gold and deep orange as his emotions rose and fell. Ash was more philosophical about the situation, accepting of change in a way that her counterpart struggled with. Olivia spent hours each night reassuring her dragons that nothing would come between them, that her bond with them was older and deeper than any human connection could ever be. But the truth was more complicated. Olivia was beginning to care for Marcus in ways that confused and frightened her. He was intelligent and brave, but more than that, he challenged her assumptions about her own civilization. He asked difficult questions that the council would have labeled as heresy. Why were elf traditions more valuable than progress? Why was change inherently dangerous? Why had the elves chosen stagnation over growth? Marcus showed her recordings from Earth, the human homeworld. She saw their cities growing and changing, their art and music evolving constantly, their sciences advancing at a pace that made the ancient elf knowledge seem almost quaint. But she also saw their wars, their suffering, their incredible capacity for cruelty toward one another. Humans were not better than elves. They were simply different. They embraced struggle and competition as natural parts of existence. The breaking point came when Marcus requested access to the council archives, the most restricted location in elf civilization. Thousands of years of research and knowledge were stored there, including technologies and magical applications that the council believed were too dangerous for anyone outside the immediate government to know about. Olivia should have refused immediately. Instead, she found herself seriously considering his request. That evening, she took Marcus to a private garden high above the city, where ancient trees grew that had lived for over 5,000 years. It was her favorite place, somewhere she had retreated to when the weight of her long life became too much to bear alone. "I cannot give you access to the archives," she said without preamble, "but I can tell you what you want to know." Marcus sat beside her on a bench made of white crystal, watching as Ember and Ash lounged nearby. The dragons had grown accustomed to his presence, and they no longer tensed when he approached. "What do you think I want to know?" Marcus asked. "You want to understand why we are so afraid of change," Olivia replied. "You want to know if we were ever different, if there was a time when elves embraced innovation like your people do? Were you?" Marcus leaned closer, his intense eyes searching hers. Olivia took a deep breath and began to tell him the truth that only the oldest members of the council knew. Thousands of years ago, when elf civilization was young, they had been exactly like humans. They had been explorers and adventurers, willing to take risks and embrace new ideas. But over time, they had become afraid. They had discovered magic that could extend their lives indefinitely, and with that knowledge came a terrible burden. They had begun to see themselves as separate from other species, as inherently superior due to their longevity and magical abilities. "We became comfortable," Olivia explained, "and comfort breeds complacency. We stopped asking questions because we believed we already had all the answers. We stopped pushing boundaries because we thought we had already found perfection. Your people terrify us because you represent everything we have abandoned. You are hungry for knowledge and growth, and that hunger reminds us of what we used to be." "Is that why the dragons are dying?" Marcus asked softly. Olivia's hand froze. He was not supposed to know that. The dragon population had declined to almost nothing over the centuries, and it was something the council went to great lengths to hide from other species. "How did you know that?" she demanded, though she already suspected the answer. Marcus was intelligent and observant, and he had been studying everything around him with military precision. "I asked your scientists questions they were reluctant to answer," Marcus admitted, "but the answer was there in the decline of their population, the way they are guarded and protected like relics rather than living creatures. Dragons should be strong and numerous, but instead, they are almost extinct. Something happened to them. Olivia stood and walked to the edge of the garden, looking out over the glowing cities below. Ember moved to her side, pressing his massive head against her shoulder in a gesture of comfort. "The dragons and elves were always connected," she said quietly. "When we stopped taking risks and stopped embracing our wild nature, the dragons suffered. They need adventure and challenge just like we once did. Instead, we have kept them caged and comfortable, and in doing so, we have slowly killed them. I lost 3 bonded dragons before I formed the connection with Ember and Ash. I was younger and still trying to live the way the Council demanded. I only kept them alive by defying the Council's passive approach and taking them into dangerous situations. You could change that," Marcus said. "You have the power. Your voice matters in the Council." "One voice against thousands of years of tradition is not enough," Olivia replied. "Change requires more than conviction. It requires acceptance. My people are afraid, and fear is a powerful motivator." Marcus stood and took her hand. The touch sent electricity through her, something she had not felt in centuries. Being with him challenged her in fundamental ways, made her question everything she thought she knew about her own civilization and her place within it. "Then we show them what is possible," he said. "We show them that humans and elves can work together. We show them that your dragons are not dying relics but magnificent creatures worthy of protection and care. We show them that change is not destruction. We show them that growth is possible." It sounded so simple when he said it, but Olivia knew the reality was infinitely more complex. The Council would never accept such radical change without something forcing their hand. She tried to explain this to Marcus, but he was already moving forward with his usual confident optimism. Over the next week, Marcus coordinated with his team to showcase human-elf cooperation. They conducted joint military exercises where elf mages worked alongside human soldiers. The results were extraordinary. Magic combined with technology created effects that neither species could achieve alone. Elf long-range spellcasting could be enhanced by human targeting systems. Human armor could be reinforced with magical wards. The two civilizations had different strengths, and when those strengths were combined, they were far more powerful than either alone. The Council began to take notice. Even the oldest members could not deny the results of the exercises. A few elves were genuinely impressed and began advocating for closer ties with humanity. But others became more entrenched in their resistance, seeing the growing cooperation as a threat to elf supremacy. Then came the warning. Scouts detected a massive pirate fleet forming near the outer territories. It was comprised of desperate species from across the galaxy, unified by greed and violence rather than any genuine alliance. They had already destroyed several smaller settlements and were moving steadily toward both elf and human territories. The Council debated their response endlessly. Some wanted to hide behind their magical defenses and let the humans deal with the threat. Others advocated for a purely elf response, using their power to annihilate the pirates. Marcus proposed a different approach. They would work together, combining forces to eliminate the threat completely. Olivia stood before the Council and made her recommendation. She would lead a joint strike force of elf warriors and human soldiers. Her dragons would provide aerial reconnaissance and support. It was dangerous and unprecedented, but she believed it was the only way to truly defeat the pirates and prove that cooperation was not weakness, but strength. The Council voted. To everyone's surprise, even some of the traditionalists supported her proposal. Perhaps they finally understood that the old ways were insufficient for the challenges ahead. Perhaps they simply feared the pirates more than they feared change. Regardless, the decision was made. As preparations began for the coming battle, Olivia trained with her dragons in ways she had not in centuries. She took Ember and Ash through dangerous maneuvers, pushing them to their limits, reminding them of the warrior spirits they had inherited from their ancient ancestors. Marcus trained alongside her with his soldiers. The pirate fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of locusts, their ships dark and menacing against the backdrop of stars. There were over 100 vessels ranging from small fighter craft to massive capital ships, each bristling with weapons. The combined elf and human forces numbered significantly less, but what they lacked in numbers they made up for in training and coordination. Olivia stood on the command deck of the flagship, watching the tactical display that showed the approach of the enemy. Beside her, Marcus studied the same data, his military mind already calculating trajectories and predicting movements. They had been working together for 3 weeks, and their tactical understanding had reached a level that was almost telepathic. Each anticipated the other's decisions, and they moved in perfect synchronization. The plan was relatively simple, though the execution would be extraordinarily difficult. The human fleet would engage the larger pirate vessels while elf mages provided ranged magical support. Smaller elf fighter craft would handle the enemy's light forces. Olivia and her dragons would be held in reserve, waiting for the moment when they would be most needed. In theory, it would work perfectly. But warfare rarely proceeded according to theory. The first volley of weapons fire lit up the void between the fleets. Human missiles streaked across space, some finding their marks while others were deflected by pirate point defense systems. The pirate ships responded with their own weapons, unleashing a barrage of laser fire and plasma bursts. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos, orchestrated by two species that had learned to function as a unified force. Ember pressed against Olivia's leg, sensing her tension through their magical bond. The dragon wanted to join the battle immediately, his warrior instincts overwhelming any sense of caution. Ash coiled tighter, her silver scales catching the glow of the tactical displays. She understood strategy in a way that Ember did not, and she could accept the role of reserve more easily. For the first 30 minutes, everything proceeded according to plan. The human fleet absorbed the brunt of the initial attack while elf mages unleashed devastating spells from a distance. Massive fireballs and lightning storms lit up the darkness of space, turning the pirate vessels into burning wrecks that tumbled through the void. But then something unexpected happened. A massive pirate capital ship, larger than anything either the humans or elves had anticipated, emerged from behind an asteroid field. It had been concealed, waiting for the main battle to begin. Its weapon systems were ancient but incredibly powerful, built on technology that the intel reports had not predicted. It immediately targeted the human flagship where Olivia and Marcus stood. The first shot burned through the shields. Alarms screamed throughout the vessel and the lights flickered. A section of the hull breached, and emergency bulkheads sealed off the affected area. The casualty estimates that appeared on the tactical display made Olivia's heart skip a beat. 200 dead in an instant. Launch the dragons, Marcus commanded, his voice steady despite the crisis unfolding around them. We need air support now. Olivia sent the signal through their bond before she could second-guess the decision. Ember roared with pure joy, finally released from his restrictions. Ash moved more carefully, but her emerald eyes burned with purpose. The hangar doors opened, and the two dragons launched themselves into the void of space. Dragon physiology was adapted for the vacuum in ways that purely organic creatures were not. Their magical nature allowed them to exist and move freely in the emptiness between worlds. Ember accelerated at a velocity that would have torn a human body apart, moving toward the massive pirate vessel with killing intent. Ash followed more conservatively, assessing the situation even as she moved to engage. The first sign that the pirates recognized the threat came when their weapons systems swiveled to track the dragons. Energy bolts carved through space, but Ember's reflexes were far superior. He banked hard and accelerated, letting the weapons fire miss by meters. He opened his mouth and flame poured out in a roaring torrent that was both magical fire and something more primal. The fire washed over the surface of the pirate ship, searing through armor plating and shattering viewports. Emergency systems kicked in, but the damage was already done. Ash moved to flank the vessel, hitting it from a different angle with her own breath weapon. The two dragons worked in perfect coordination, their centuries of being bonded allowing them to anticipate each other's movements without communication. But the pirate ship was massive, and damage that would have crippled a smaller vessel merely slowed it down. Its weapons continued firing, more accurate this time. One bolt caught Ember across the shoulder, searing his scales and burning through to the muscle beneath. He shrieked in pain and rage, the sound echoing through the vacuum. Olivia felt his pain through their bond, a sharp spike of agony that made her gasp. Without thinking, she made a decision that would change everything. She moved to the airlock. Marcus grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done from the beginning," Olivia replied. She activated a magical shield that would allow her to survive in the vacuum, then opened the airlock and stepped out into space. Flying through the void toward her wounded dragon, Olivia felt more alive than she had in centuries. Her magic flowed around her like water, creating a protective bubble that allowed her to breathe and move freely. The battle raged all around her, human ships and pirate vessels locked in deadly combat, elf spells lighting up the darkness like fireworks. She reached Ember and placed her hand on his injured shoulder. Through their bond, she sent healing energy, drawing on reserves of magical power that the Council had always told her to keep in reserve. The wound closed, the burned flesh knitting back together. It would take time for him to fully recover, but at least he was no longer in critical danger. Ash had maneuvered herself onto the pirate ship's hull and was clawing at the weapons emplacements with claws that cut through reinforced steel like paper. Her presence there was creating chaos among the pirate crew, forcing them to divert resources away from their weapons systems. Olivia made a decision in that moment that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. She opened herself fully to the ancient magic that flowed through her bloodline, magic that her kind had not used in direct combat for thousands of years. She called upon the primal forces that elves had wielded when they were wild and fierce and unafraid. She became something more than she had been, a warrior in the truest sense of the word. Her magic erupted outward, battering against the pirate vessel with the force of a solar wind. The ship's exterior crumpled under the assault. Its weapons fell silent. Through the chaos, she could feel the desperation of its crew, their sudden realization that they were facing something they could not defeat. The turning point in the battle came not from any single action, but from the combination of everything Olivia had done. With the massive pirate capital ship disabled and burning, the other pirate vessels lost their will to fight. They began to retreat, using their superior maneuverability to break away from the combined human and elf forces. Marcus coordinated the pursuit, but it became clear quickly that the pirates had no intention of a final stand. They were fleeing, scattering across the stars, no longer unified. The threat had been neutralized. Olivia flew Ember back to the human flagship, her magic still burning hot through her veins. Ash followed with the same grace she brought to everything. As they entered the hangar, the assembled crew erupted in applause and cheers. Both human soldiers and elf warriors stood together, celebrating a victory that had been achieved only through their joint efforts. Marcus met Olivia as she descended from Ember's back. For a moment he simply looked at her, seeing her as she truly was, not an ambassador or a political figure, but a warrior with ancient magic flowing through her veins, someone capable of incredible power and devastating beauty in equal measure. "You were magnificent," he said simply. But Olivia was already reaching out to Ember, assessing his wound more carefully. Her dragons had fought alongside her, risked their lives for victory. That bond was deeper than anything she felt for any human, including Marcus. In the aftermath of the battle, reports came in about the damage. Hundreds had died on both sides, but the combined forces had suffered far less than the separated forces would have. The pirate fleet was broken and scattered. Those pirates who surrendered were captured. Those who fled were pursued but ultimately allowed to escape into the depths of space. As reports compiled and damage assessments continued, Marcus and Olivia stood together on the observation deck, watching the wounded ships being tended. The war had ended before it truly began, but its implications would reshape the galaxy. The age of elf isolation had truly ended. The age of human and elf cooperation had begun in earnest. "Your council will have to accept this now," Marcus said quietly. "They cannot deny what happened here. Humans and elves working together achieved what neither could alone." "Some will still resist," Olivia warned. "But you are right. Something fundamental has shifted. We can no longer pretend that the old ways are sufficient. The dragons know this. You know this. And now perhaps even the council will finally understand." The council chambers fell silent as Olivia presented the final casualty reports and mission analysis. The battle had been won decisively, but the cost had been significant. Over 400 lives lost, multiple ships damaged beyond immediate repair, and resources spent that would take months to replace. Yet the alternative, allowing the pirate fleet to continue their rampage across settled space, would have been catastrophic. She stood before the assembled elders with Ember and Ash flanking her on either side. The presence of the dragons had become almost routine now, but it never failed to make an impact. The counselors who remembered the age when dragons were common looked at Ember and Ash with longing. Those who had only read about dragons in historical texts studied them with curiosity and reverence. The eldest counselor, Theron, had lived for over 8,000 years. He had seen civilizations rise and fall, watched technology evolve and magic adapt. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the weight of his immense age and experience. "You achieved victory through unconventional means, Ambassador," he said. "Your methods were dangerous and unprecedented. Yet the results speak for themselves. The pirate threat has been eliminated. Our settlements are safe. The humans proved to be reliable allies rather than hidden threats. But at what cost?" countered Counselor Ariella, younger by only a few centuries but far more traditional in her thinking. "We have invited a species of barbarians into our sphere of influence. They will expect continued cooperation. They will demand integration. They will eventually seek to dominate us through numbers and their appetite for expansion. I say we should have kept them at arm's length while using the battle as an opportunity to gather intelligence." Olivia felt anger rising within her, but she forced it down. She had learned much about political navigation over her long life, and outbursts of emotion rarely helped in council chambers. "With respect, Counselor Ariella," she said carefully, "the humans have shown themselves to be honorable and cooperative. Their commander has made no demands beyond what we agreed to in the original diplomatic treaties. They seek partnership, not domination. If anything, they have proven more reliable than our own allies among the lesser species." "The dragons fought at your command," Theron observed, his ancient eyes studying the two creatures beside Olivia. "This is significant. These dragons have been dormant, separated from combat for centuries. Your use of them in active warfare has awakened something ancient within them. I can see it in their bearing, in the way they hold themselves. They are no longer relics to be preserved, but warriors remembering their true nature." Ash turned her massive head toward the old counselor, and for a moment her emerald eyes seemed to hold entire universes of ancient knowledge. Theron met her gaze unflinchingly. Two ancient beings regarding each other with respect earned through countless years of existence. "Perhaps this is not a disaster," Theron continued. "Perhaps this is an opportunity to reclaim something we lost when we chose safety over strength. If we can restore the dragon population and channel their power into legitimate pursuits, we might become greater than we have been since the first age of our civilization." Other counselors began to speak, some supportive, others resistant. The debate went on for hours, but gradually Olivia sensed a shift in the chamber. Even those who had been most opposed to human cooperation were beginning to recognize the reality of the situation. The old ways had failed to keep them safe. Only the new alliance had done that. By the time the session ended, the council had voted to establish formal diplomatic ties with the human Terran Empire. They had agreed to share certain technological information and to establish joint research initiatives. Military cooperation would continue, with human and elf forces training together regularly, and most significantly, they had voted to support Olivia's proposal to attempt to revive the dragon population. It was a more limited victory than Olivia might have hoped for, but it was a genuine victory nonetheless. The elves were changing, moving away from the stagnation of ages toward a future of growth and possibility. That evening, Olivia met with Marcus in the private gardens where they had first truly talked. The gardens seemed different now, as if the entire world had shifted around them. Human scientists had begun collaborating with elf mages on various research projects. There was talk of joint settlements and cultural exchanges. The implications were staggering. "Your council still seems wary," Marcus observed, watching as Ember and Ash explored the ancient trees. "They are afraid," Olivia replied. "Fear is difficult to overcome even for those as ancient as my people. But they are beginning to understand that fear is not a good foundation for decision-making. The battle showed them that strength comes from cooperation, not isolation." Marcus took her hand and Olivia did not pull away. Their relationship had evolved beyond friendship, but they had never formally acknowledged it. It was a dangerous situation in political terms. A human and an elf together represented a direct challenge to the old hierarchies and prejudices. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "To us, I mean. To your people and mine. I do not know," Olivia admitted. "My people are not accustomed to uncertainty. We prefer to plan centuries in advance to know exactly how events will unfold. Humans seem comfortable with uncertainty, with embracing the unknown, because we do not have the luxury of centuries." Marcus explained. "Human lifespans are brief compared to yours. We cannot afford to waste time planning for eventualities that may never occur. We must live and act and deal with consequences as they come. It makes us adaptable but also uncertain. Ember roared, a sound that echoed across the gardens. Ash joined in with her own cry, a different tone but equally powerful. The dragons were calling out to something ancient within themselves and within the world around them. Over the next weeks, dramatic changes began to unfold. The first human cultural delegation arrived on the elf homeworld, bringing music and art and literature. Human scientists and elf mages began working on collaborative projects that neither species could have completed alone. Human pilots trained with elf warriors, learning different combat styles and strategies. Elf scholars traveled to human worlds to study their history and philosophy. But the most significant change came in the form of a discovery. Deep in the elf archives, researchers found records of an ancient technique for accelerating dragon reproduction and development. It had been used thousands of years ago, but had been abandoned due to religious concerns and safety precautions. With Marcus's help and using human analytical techniques combined with elf magical understanding, they developed an improved version of the technique. Within 3 months, the first new dragon egg was successfully incubated in centuries. The council gathered for the hatching, and when the small dragon emerged from its crystalline shell, there was not a dry eye in the chamber. It was blue-scaled and tiny, barely the size of a human child, but its presence represented hope for the future. Olivia stood with Marcus, watching the new dragon take its first tentative steps. Ember and Ash watched with paternal interest, their ancient instincts recognizing the potential in the young creature. This was only the beginning. Over the next decades, if the program succeeded, the dragon population could be restored, and with their restoration, the elf civilization would recover something vital that they had lost. "Your people are changing," Marcus said quietly. "Your people are changing us," Olivia corrected. "Just as we are changing you. This is what cooperation truly means. Both sides growing, both sides adapting, both sides becoming something neither could have become alone." As night fell over the gardens, Olivia reflected on how far they had come. Months ago, the idea of human and elf cooperation had been almost unthinkable. Now it was becoming reality. The dragons were awakening after centuries of dormancy. The elves were learning to embrace change again. The humans had found partners who could teach them wisdom accumulated over millennia. There were still challenges ahead. There would be those who resisted change on both sides. There would be cultural clashes and misunderstandings and conflicts that would need to be worked through. But standing there with Marcus and her dragons, watching the new hatchling explore the world with wonder and curiosity, Olivia believed that they could overcome those challenges. The age of elf isolation was truly ending. The age of cooperation was dawning, and Olivia, ambassador and warrior, dragon-bonded ancient being, found herself hoping for the first time in centuries. Hope not just for her own people but for the entire galaxy. 1 year had passed since the first dragon egg was successfully hatched. The number had grown to 5 young dragons now, each bearing unique colors and characteristics. Some showed the golden scales like Ember, others the silver tipping of Ash. They grew rapidly under the combined care of elf mages and human biologists. The collaborative efforts had exceeded all expectations. Olivia stood in the dragon sanctuary, watching as the young dragons played and practiced their aerial movements under careful supervision. She wore a new title now, not just ambassador but also director of the Dragon Restoration Initiative. It was a position that had required her to navigate political challenges on both sides. Some elves still believed she was giving away their cultural heritage to humans. Some humans worried that dragons would be used as weapons without appropriate controls. But the presence of the young creatures, living and thriving, had begun to change minds. Ember and Ash had taken on unexpected roles as mentors and guardians to the young dragons. Their ancient nature gave them instinctive authority over the younger creatures. They had begun to pass on their knowledge, teaching the hatchlings how to channel magic, how to control their strength, how to understand the bond that formed between dragon and elf. Marcus had remained on the elf homeworld far longer than his original mission parameters allowed. The human government had appointed him as permanent liaison, effectively making him part of the elf administrative structure. He had taken on a role that bridged both civilizations, translating not just language but culture and perspective between his people and the elves. The relationship between Olivia and Marcus had evolved from secretive meetings in gardens to something more open and recognized. The council had formally acknowledged them as a bonded pair, the elf term for a committed relationship. Some traditionalists still objected, but the younger elves increasingly saw their union as symbolic of the new era that was dawning. Today was significant for another reason. The first joint colony was being established, a settlement where humans and elves would live together as equals. It would be on a neutral world, one not claimed by either civilization, allowing both species to contribute equally to its development. Olivia and Marcus were to oversee the establishment personally, and they would bring Ember and Ash with them. The voyage to the colony world took 3 weeks through space, time that Olivia spent working on diplomatic protocols and Marcus spent on military logistics. But they also spent time together, sometimes in each other's company, sometimes separately seeking their own sources of peace. For Olivia, that meant flying with her dragons through the void, their magical presences creating a bubble of safety in the vacuum. For Marcus, it meant studying ancient elf texts, trying to understand the civilization he had become part of. The colony world was beautiful, with vast oceans and sprawling continents. The climate was temperate, the resources abundant. It would be a good home for the new settlement. The first structures were already being constructed by human and elf engineers working together. They had designed buildings that incorporated elements from both cultures, mixing human functionality with elf aesthetics. Olivia watched as the first dragon had to consider the new settlement carefully. This was not just a colony in the conventional sense. It was an experiment in genuine integration. Would humans and elves choose to live together peacefully when there was no external threat forcing cooperation? Would cultural differences create conflict without the pressure of necessity driving them together? These were questions that would determine whether the alliance could last beyond the crisis that had sparked it. But within weeks, it became clear that the experiment was working better than anyone had dared hope. Children from both species played together in the streets, their games incorporating elements of both human games and elf traditions. The hybrid architecture created spaces that were beautiful and functional, more effective than either culture's designs alone. Shared research initiatives began immediately, with human scientists and elf mages working on problems that benefited both populations. There were conflicts, certainly. Some humans struggled with elf formality and their deeply hierarchical social structures. Some elves found human informality and their emphasis on individual achievement destabilizing. But rather than driving a wedge between the communities, these conflicts became opportunities for deeper understanding. Humans learned that elf formality was not coldness but respect for the weight of centuries. Elves learned that human informality was not disrespect, but a reflection of their briefer lifespans and the urgency it created. One evening, Olivia stood with Marcus on a high cliff overlooking the colony. Ember lay beside them, his massive form a living reminder of ancient power. Ash flew overhead, her wingspan vast against the darkening sky. The colony lights began to come on below them. Human structures intermingled with elf buildings, creating a patchwork of light that symbolized the blending of two civilizations. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked. "Coming to terms with change, risking your people's future on alliance with my species?" Olivia considered the question carefully. "I regret nothing about the choice," she said finally. "But I would be dishonest if I said there were not moments when I questioned my decisions. Change is difficult even when it is necessary. My people were comfortable in their stagnation, and comfort is a powerful force." "My people were desperate," Marcus said. "We took this alliance because we needed to prove we belonged among the great powers of the galaxy. We were hungry in ways that your people had forgotten how to be." "And now?" Olivia asked. "Now we are building something that neither of us could have built alone," Marcus replied. "That is worth any risk or any sacrifice," Ember roared, a sound of contentment and power. Ash circled lower, responding to the call of her bonded partner. The dragons seemed to understand something that many of the slower-thinking species did not. They recognized that this moment represented a turning point, not just for two species but for the galaxy itself. As the months progressed, the colony grew and flourished. More human-elf partnerships formed, some romantic, some professional, some both. The dragons that had been too young to participate in the original battle grew stronger and more capable. They trained with both human soldiers and elf warriors, learning combat techniques from both species. The youngest hatchlings began to show signs of bonding with specific individuals, human and elf alike, breaking ancient taboos about which species could form bonds with dragons. Back on the elf homeworld, the council continued its gradual transformation. Younger elves, those born after the age of exploration had ended, pushed for more dramatic changes. Some advocated for complete integration with human society, others wanted to maintain elf identity while benefiting from the alliance. The debates were fierce and sometimes bitter, but they were happening, and that was what mattered. Olivia received reports that the first mixed species child had been born, a daughter with her mother's human features but her father's elf grace. The council had debated for weeks about what this meant, whether such children would be recognized as full members of elf society or held in some intermediate status. In the end, pragmatism won out. The child was recognized as elf and human both, a living symbol of the new era. On the first anniversary of the colony's establishment, Olivia and Marcus stood before representatives of both civilizations. The human admiral and the elf council head stood together, something that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. The pirate fleets that had threatened their territories had been hunted down and destroyed by joint human-elf task forces. Trade flourished between the two species. Cultural exchanges had become regular events. "We have accomplished something significant," Olivia said to the assembled crowd. "We have moved beyond mere alliance to genuine partnership. Humans and elves are no longer separate species with divergent interests. We are building something new together." "But this is only the beginning," Marcus added. "There is so much more we can achieve. New worlds to explore, new knowledge to discover, problems to solve that neither species could handle alone. This alliance is not an ending but a beginning." The crowd erupted in applause, both human and elf voices joining together. It was a sound that Olivia knew she would carry with her for the rest of her impossibly long life. As the celebration continued, Olivia walked away from the crowds, seeking solitude. Ember and Ash followed, as they always did. She found a high vantage point overlooking the colony and the vast territories beyond it. From this perspective, she could see the future stretching out before them. It would not be easy. There would be conflicts and challenges, times when it seemed like the alliance would crumble under the weight of its own contradictions. But they would face those challenges together. Ember pressed his head against her, a gesture of comfort and reassurance. Ash wrapped around them both, creating a circle of ancient magic and modern hope. The dragons had been dormant for so long, and now they were awakening. Their population was growing. New dragons were being born every month. The ancient legacy of elf civilization was being restored, not through preservation but through evolution.